All right, we're picking back up where we were last week with this period of mixed focus and looking at, the modified Bookman's chart here. This is where we're at. We're in this period of mixed focus, and then we will be transitioning to the Passion of the Christ, the Passion Week. And so we will be, depending on how far we get today, we're kind of pushing the boundaries here on our lessons. But if we're able to get as far as the plan, we'll get to just before the triumphal entry. And so we will be getting very close to the Passion Week. And next week we will pick up there for sure if we don't start getting close to that today. Hmm. So we are in this period of mixed focus. Again, Jesus is in and around Jerusalem. It's a period of 6 months. This is really the last 6 months of Jesus's earthly ministry and life prior to his crucifixion. There are 3 trips to Jerusalem or in the vicinity during this time. There's one for the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles in late October, November. Then there's the Feast of Dedication, which we know as Hanukkah, which happens in December. And we were finishing that up last time. And then today we will see this third trip where Jesus goes not into Jerusalem proper, but Bethany, which is just outside of it, um, for the resurrection of Lazarus. So that sets the context of where we're at. And so last time, like I said, we were looking at the Feast of Dedication. And I went too far. There we go, the Feast of Dedication. This was that a feast that was really commemorating the Maccabees and their success in basically, recapturing Jerusalem and the temple, purifying it, cleaning it after it had been defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes in 164 BC, and then their subsequent conquering of, or basically pushing back and repelling the Seleucid Empire out of the region of Israel, and starting what effectively was the Hasmonean, or it was the Hasmonean dynasty. And so that was a kingdom that they had over Israel for roughly a little over 100 years, from 164 time frame to the early 60s BC, and then they uh, basically became subjugated to Rome through General Pompey. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. And the Jewish leaders had asked him to plainly tell him he is the Christ. Again, not because they wanted him to prove it, or they wanted to trap him, right? So that the Romans would have some reason to capture him, arrest him, and do away with him. And Jesus associates himself, so he's the Son of God, that him and the Father are one, um, and so basically they want to stone him for that, and Jesus escapes. So this is where we're going to pick up today, and it's kind of fascinating how whenever they come to get Jesus or they want to throw him off a cliff or what have you, Jesus just manages to slip away. But he's going to go into Jerusalem here in next time we're together, and he's not going to be slipping away. And the reason is his hour hadn't come, but now his hour is coming. And so he could very easily slip away, but he deliberately knows what's going to happen, and he's going to tell his disciples and his 12 what's going to happen, and he's going anyway. So he's not going to be slipping away. But now he is. He's going to escape, and he's going to go and start ministering in Perea. And we're going to pick up here. So the Jews are seeking to kill him. It's no longer safe for Jesus to stay and remain in this area. So he flees Jerusalem, I suspect with some haste, and heads to the area beyond the Jordan, the area Perea. In Greek, the word Perea actually means beyond the Jordan, right? So it's one word. And so that's where Jesus goes. And this is a trip of some 15 to 17 miles out of Jerusalem. He's going to go over Mount Olives and then down the ascent of Adamim, and we'll talk more about that later to this lesson or beginning of next week as well. Toward Jericho, into the Jordan Rift. So here's the Jordan. So he's headed over, from Jerusalem. He's going to go over the ascent of Adamim. He's going to go into Jericho. He's going to go into the rift, cross the Jordan, and now he's in this area, Perea, which was also the kind of area where him and John the Baptist were baptizing. Now, this is the area where Jesus is going to be, and I'll show you this again in a bigger picture. You will see this a few times here. And so this is kind of the route, and we're doing it backwards here, and he's going to go up to Jericho and then over here to Perea. And we'll see him. We're going to go the other way here in a little bit. Now, John 10, verse 40 records Jesus's move to Perea. So let's go ahead and look at that. In John 10, we'll look at 40 to 42. And so, again, 39, they were seeking to seize him again, and he eluded their grasp. And he went away again beyond the Jordan to the place where John was first baptizing, and he was staying there. And many came to him and were saying, while John performed no sign, yet everything John said about this man was true. And many believed in him there. So they have seen everything that Jesus has done. And they remember John the Baptist. John the Baptist, highly revered in Jewish culture, long after Christ's crucifixion and resurrection and ascension. Independent of people that don't believe in Christ, John the Baptist, highly revered in Jewish culture in the early centuries of this era. And they remember what John was saying and say, everything John has said about Jesus has come true. And so they're believing, hey, this is the Messiah that John talked about. Now, this is where Jesus is going to be, and he's going to be there 6 to 8 weeks. So we're going from December into, end of January, early mid-February timeframe of 33. What year does Jesus die? 33. So we're getting very close. Now, again, people have made this connection between what John the Baptist said and what Jesus has done, and the result is they believe in him. And Luke 13 adds to it. I have my mouse. Luke 13, and we'll look at verse 23. He was passing, and he proceeded on his way to Jerusalem, and some said, Lord, are there just a few who are being saved? And he said to them, here's Jesus teaching him here. I'm not going to read all of this because of time. Jews from Judea and Galilee most likely hear that Jesus is in Perea and go to where he's at. So this section here is in Perea, and possibly they're making the connection with John the Baptist. Now, let's talk a little bit about what is significant about Jesus going to Perea. So they're wanting to seize him in Jerusalem. So Jesus just goes 15 miles away to Perea. What's so big about that? Why don't they just go get him there? What's that? It is Gentile area. Well, not as much as the Decapolis north. But it is that's part of it. But you're on the right track. Okay, it's not that they're Gentile because they're still under Herod Antipas, but so it's not like the Decapolis. Yeah, Dale. Yes, that is modern day Jordan. So here's the political map that we've seen many times. So the Decapolis is all Gentile. There's going to be mix in here, but this is under Pilate, and the Jews have control over Pilate. He's over here. Antipas doesn't care about what the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem think. So Jesus comes over here, and now it's like you can say all you want, you can come, but the Romans aren't going to come get me, and you can't get me because of the crowds. So Jesus is safe here. So what do they do? Again, like I mentioned, Pilate is over Judea and Jerusalem. Herod Antipas is over this area, Galilee and Perea. And Herod is in good with the Roman Caesar. This area is highly Gentile, as was mentioned. Um, and Jews have absolutely no influence over him. And again, we've talked about Pilate being in very hot water with Tiberius because Pilate was sponsored by Sejanus, who was executed in basically 2 years ago at this point for a failed coup attempt. And Pilate had also had some other missteps. And so, again, remember, Pilate is walking on thin ice. The Jewish leaders have all kinds of things that on the Jews, and so they're using that as or on Pilate. The Jewish leaders have all kinds of things on Pilate, and they're using that as leverage. We could just write one letter to Tiberius, and you're off to the gallows. So Pilate knows that. Well, let's go back to Luke, and let's look here at verse 31, because now we are in this area, and Luke, it isn't as clear where we're at from his chronology, because again, it's just one travel log. It doesn't always explicit at this point on where he's at, but he is in Perea. And just at that time, some Pharisees approached, saying to him, "Go away, leave here, for Herod wants to kill you." That's interesting. What do you think's going on here? Exactly. It's just, these Jews, they're out to kill him. Are they really out looking for Jesus' safety? No, not at all. But they can't do anything. We come back into Judea where you're going to be safe, and then we can nab you, right? So that's what's going on here. And so Jesus responds, "Go and tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I reach my goal." So here's an allusion to the 3 days until he's resurrected. "Nevertheless, I must journey on today and tomorrow and the next day, for it cannot be that a prophet would perish outside of Jerusalem." So this is significant because Um, the Old Testament is full of records of prophets being killed in Jerusalem. Uh, Zechariah being one of them. So, yeah, in front of the temple, right? So he's making, hey, far be it for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Like, I know why you're here, right? And, the time will come. And so then he says this: "How often I wanted to gather your children just as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you would not have it." And I missed it here. One thing above that is, O Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who sent to her." They're just going to repeat this process over again. And he talks about how he wanted to bring them together. They wouldn't do it. "Behold, your house is left to you desolate." This is a prophecy toward AD 70 and the destruction of Israel and the temple. "And I say to you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" When do they say that? Huh? going to say this in 6 weeks at the triumphal entry. So he's basically saying, you're not going to see me again until I come into Jerusalem riding on a donkey as the Messiah, clearly articulated in Zechariah. And so that's what's going to happen here. So that's what we have. Now, we're here and we're going to go to John because now John has uh, an, an, a supplement that isn't in the other three Gospels, and this is the death and resurrection of Lazarus. So Jesus is in Perea, and he's outside of Jerusalem. He's outside of Judea, where they are actively looking to kill him. And a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany. Bethany is the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So the sisters sent word to Jesus. They know where he's at. Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. So Jesus is friends with his family. And he would undoubtedly stay there from time to time in his travels, and he'll stay there during the Passion Week. He'll stay there during Passion Week. But when Jesus heard this, he said, the sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Well, it is going to end in death, but it's not going to stay at death. And the Son of God will be glorified because of this. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 days longer in the place that he was. Isn't that interesting? It says, he loved them and he heard he's sick. Instead of going to him, he's like, I'm going to wait. Yeah, right. And so there's some irony here. That's because he knows what he's going to do. Yeah. Jews didn't believe a person was dead, black in bed 4 days. Jesus is going to wait 4 days. You're right, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But the irony is, in fact, he says he loves them, and then he doesn't go to them right away. That was the point. But you're right, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Okay. Now, verse 7, he says, after they've waited 2 days longer in the place where he was, then after that he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. To which the disciples said, are you crazy? They're trying to kill you. And he says, rabbis, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going to go there again? So I paraphrased it. You know, I gave probably what they really said, and then Matthew kind of like made it a little smoother when he wrote it down. Or John, John made it a little smoother. Okay. That's one of those things. Okay, now anyway, Jesus says, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. This he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of sleep. And so he's using sleep here as a euphemism for death. And the disciples, sometimes they're really dense, said, Lord, if he's falling asleep, he'll recover. He's getting rest. Now Jesus said, spoken plainly about his death, and basically he's dead. And they thought that he was speaking of literal sleep. So he said, Lazarus is dead. I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. So again, Jesus knows what he's going to do. Like, I'm glad we weren't there because I would have healed him there and you wouldn't get to see what's about to happen. Now, I love Thomas. He also is pretty transparent. And he says, again, Didymus, because he's a twin. It says to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go so that we may die with him." It's one all for one and one for all, right? So this is serious. We read this, they were seizing to kill him. That's real. You know, think of like enemy of the state kind of thing, right? If I'm not going to use any modern illustrations. Um, well, I do record this and it's on YouTube, so but anyway, um, there are things here where okay, so it's real. The threat is real, and they're all like, okay, we're going to go in there and we're going to be killed, but let's go. If Jesus is going to die, we'll die with him. It's kind of interesting because in a few weeks, they're going to have a different sentiment, right? They're going to scatter, right, in the Garden of Gethsemane. Um, all right. So when Jesus came, he found that he'd already been in the tomb 4 days. And again, as or Don had said, or excuse me, Doug had said, Doug had said, um, the 4 days is important because the fourth day is when the Jews would come and mourn with the family. That was the day of mourning. Because up to that point, along the way, I guess there's some thought that maybe they're not really dead or a life would return to them or coma, whatever. But after day 4 or on day 4, that's when people would gather around the family and it's like, no, he's not sick, he's dead. Right? So this is the day when everybody is there. Basically the open house, what have you, around Lazarus and Mary and Martha. And so when Jesus comes, this isn't going to be like just, drop in by the family and there's nobody else there. Everybody is there, which means people are going to see what Jesus is about to do. So there's 2 points to this. One, Lazarus is really dead, and there are a lot of people there that are going to see what Jesus does. And again, this is where that period of like mixed focus, where Jesus does things publicly, and then he kind of goes off and is a little bit secluded. Now, he's there. So now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. So this is about the distance. So think about Chipotle's down the road, maybe before it was like $15 for a burrito or something like that. You may have gone there after church for lunch sometimes. Um, but then the prices were doubled and then the quality went down. But anyway, so yeah, we probably don't do that anymore. But back then, and it still is, it's like 2.5 miles. Okay, so Culver's is a little closer. So we're kind of talking about the distance from Parker Bible Church to Culver's. You know what I'm saying? Maybe not even that far. You can walk it, in 20 minutes probably, right? Maybe 30. And depending on how fast you go. And so now, that's where they're at. They're about 2 miles off, and that's gonna be important, on the trip back, later on. So Jesus is there, and Martha now many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary, verse 19, to console them concerning their brother. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at the house. Martha then said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And that's true. Jesus acknowledged that when he was in Perea with the disciples. I'm glad I wasn't there. Um, Even now, I know whatever you ask of God, God will give you. What faith? Your brother is dead. No, please don't install something. Okay. And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Again, faith in the scriptures. We're here with Job. I got a tattoo on my arm. I know my Redeemer lives. And then the next part of that verse in Job 19:25 is, and at the last he will take his stand on the earth, and in my flesh I will see God. So Job said that, and Martha is in agreement with it. And he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? He said, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, Messiah and God, King, God, both, who comes into the world. When she said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, the teacher is here. So we're kind of respecting Jesus, kind of like not having a whole mob come to him. And she goes to Mary and says, hey, Mary, Jesus is here. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and was coming to him. Now, Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in a place where Martha had met him. So kind of out on the outskirts a little bit. And the Jews who were with Mary in the house and consoling her, when they saw Mary got up quickly and went out, they followed her. Like, oh, moral support here. What's going on? Thinking she's going to go to the tomb and weep there, but she didn't. She's going to find Jesus. And when she came to where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying, Lord, same thing. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus was therefore saw her weeping. The Jews who came with her also weeping. He was deeply moved. Now, so Lazarus was an important figure in this little town of Bethany, right? And so they're going to have dinners and things like this here in the days ahead and weeks ahead, just before Passion Week. And there's a lot of people are going to be there, and there's a lot of people here in this community that look. Lazarus was a man of standing, and so they're coming out, and she says again, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews came also were weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. Again, Jesus is emotional here. We see his humanity. We're going to see it again. Jesus, again, he's just human like us. Now, he's deity too, but he's fully human like you and I. He's not less human than us. He's that plus deity. We can't figure that out. And so then he asks a question, where have you laid him? Now, this to me, I always find shocking because we struggle with Jesus being God and man both, and his omniscience and when it's active and when it's not. He's going to raise him from the dead. And he's like, I'll raise him from the dead. Just tell me where he is. And it's like, now the people will say here, he's doing this for the people and blah, blah, blah. Like, I think this is in his humanity here. And again, we get this perfect juxtaposition of the humanity and the deity of Jesus Christ. Because here his omniscience isn't seem to be fully engaged, modulated, as I said at the beginning, by the Holy Spirit. So in his humanity and his limitations there, like, take me to where he's at. And they said, Lord, come and see. We have our shortest verse of the Bible, verse 35. Jesus wept. Again, he's emotional, he's sad, and just like us, from a human perspective. So the Jews were saying, see how he loved him. This isn't just a tear, right? This is like when your best friend dies and you're there, you're going to be sad. But some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man also from dying? Yes, he could have. Yes, Jesus could have, but he deliberately didn't. So Jesus, again being deeply moved, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, remove the stone. And Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he had been dead for 4 days. So reality, dead things stink. And Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, you'll see the glory of God? So they removed the stone. And then Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I said it, so that they may believe that you sent me." And when he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth!" And the man who died came forth, and hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary, saw what he had done, believed in him. Some went to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done. Now, a couple things I want to point out here as we go. First off, I want to go back just a little bit. When Mary is with Jesus, notice when Jesus asks in verse 34, "Where have you laid him?" Mary isn't the one that answers. It's the Jews that are with him or with her. And what do they say? They, do they keep important, pronouns, their words are important. They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Now, these Jews are calling Jesus Lord. What does that mean? They believed in Jesus too. So Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are not the only people in Bethany that believe and have come to realize that Jesus is the Christ. All right. Now, here we get into another situation. And again, verse 45, many believed. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done, I tell you, this is a lot of people here. They believed in Jesus. But some said, "Oh, we got to go tell the Pharisees. We got to let them know." And basically tattletale, say, "We know where Jesus is. He's in Bethany. And yeah, you can go get him. Yeah, he just raised somebody from the dead, but he's there. You can go." So this is crazy. We get in the next couple verses. Therefore, the chief priests and the Pharisees convene a council and were saying, "What are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away our place in our nation. We'll lose our status. We'll lose our income. We've got a good thing going here. We got to get rid of this Jesus guy. Who cares if he's the Messiah? We got to kill him because, you know, we got the system rigged pretty well." And so we see also here just the total fallen and wretchedness of humanity, which all of us are in that same boat. Thankfully, not always to the same degree. And then those of us that have been saved and born again, the Holy Spirit comes in and regenerates us and frees us from this bondage. But, you know, it's easy to say, how could they do this? But, at some point we also were hostile toward God. So anyway, that's what they do. And this is the Pharisees and the chief priests. So the chief priests, Sadducees, because they control the temple. Pharisees, they're out in the synagogues, and they convene a council, like Sanhedrin, and they're saying, "What are we doing?" They recognize the signs. They recognize people are believing in him. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, "No, you know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish." Like, this is simple. We just got to kill this guy. That way the whole nation doesn't get, um, taken away by Rome. And so, verse 53, from that day onward, they planned together to kill him. So they were already out to get him. That was evident. Thomas said that when they were in Perea, "Let's all go die together." But now they're like being very specific. It's like, what are we doing? We're messing around here. Let's get the job done. And so we have there this setup. John is showing us and is adding to this the circumstances that led to the events that are coming in Jerusalem. How is it that when Jesus goes to Jerusalem, this time they kill him? How did we go and get to this point? There were details that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Spirit did not inspire them to include. John, who's got another scroll, because you're limited by how much you can put on a scroll, is using that to put in some more detail. And now he's explaining how this happened. Therefore, Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but he went away from there to the country near the wilderness to the city called Ephraim. Ephraim. Now, where is that? That's going to be right. I think it's, yeah, here we go. At the top of this orange arrow. So he's going to come up here. And what we're not told here, but I'm going to show you, is this is on the border with Samaria. So let's see, I got a map. It's going to kind of, it doesn't show, yeah, it doesn't show where Ephraim is on this one, but it does show kind of the border. It kind of goes through there. And so Ephraim is along here, and and the borders aren't necessarily specific, mapped out with GPS like we do today, but this is where he's at. So basically, he's in Samaria, or where they're not going to go, or in the kind of that region. So he's safe there. And again, it's kind of like the Perea episode. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go up to Samaria. The Jews aren't going to go get me in Samaria, or along the border with it, so he can slip into Samaria if he needs to, depending exactly where that border was. But let's place it in Samaria. Now the Passover was near, and so we're going to see that. Now let's talk us a little bit about this. There, he's going to stay there in Ephraim. Let me go back to my PowerPoint because there might be some slides here that I've. Okay. He's going to go there to the border of Samaria, go into seclusion. He's there with his disciples, and this is where he's going to stay until he starts his final journey to Jerusalem for the triumphal entry. And this next thing that we're going to talk about is how the events of the triumphal entry take place. And so let's go ahead and start talking about this. To Jerusalem. We're going to shift now to talk about really that final trip that Jesus makes. And, we've ended here with Jesus in the small village of Ephraim in the border region between Judah and Samaria. He went there immediately after the resurrection of Lazarus because the Jewish leaders were actively conspiring to kill him. He's been there about 6 to 8 weeks. But now the Passover feast is very close, probably less than 2 weeks away. So now Jesus is going to head to Jerusalem to endure the cross. The Jewish people are excited with anticipation with the possibility that both Jesus and Lazarus would be coming to the Jerusalem for the Passover. So let's look at John 11 real quick. Now, these people know what's going on. They're starting to wonder, are they going to come? And so in 55, 56, now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up to Jerusalem out of the country, or from the country regions. They're leaving there. They all come to Jerusalem. So out in the country, they're all coming to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. And they were seeking for Jesus. And they were saying to one another as they stood in the temple, what do you think? Will he not come to the feast at all? Because everyone knows he's going to try to kill him. So it's like, is he not going to come? But they're also looking for Lazarus too. Because we go into chapter 12, we'll look at verse 9. A large crowd of the Jews that learned that he was there, and we'll talk about that in context in a little bit, not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. Now all these people in Jerusalem, or on their way to Jerusalem, are wondering, will we see Jesus? Is Lazarus going to come? That's the expectation. Everybody's heard about this. You raise somebody up from the dead, at least someone who's kind of respected, at least in that area, and people hear about it. So, moving forward. Yet on Palm Sunday, why was there a crowd gathered? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Jesus is going to ride in on a donkey. There's all this crowd there. Why? How come there's a crowd? How do they know that Jesus is even coming down the road? Jesus goes in and out all the time. People don't know he's there until he gets there. Here, they're all like, the people are waiting for him. Odd. How did that happen? What's that? Yeah, but I don't think the people were thinking that. We got a much more, you're right, because Jesus is going to say on this day, but the people didn't know which way he was going to come, how he was going to be. And I don't know how many people really did the math that day to know. But there is a very pragmatic, practical way that everybody knew when and where Jesus was coming into town. And so let's talk about it. How did they know? Well, they had heard that he was coming. That's one thing that we looked at 12:9. We'll go there again. Large crowd of the Jews, when they heard that he was there, they did not come for his sake only, but also for Lazarus. So they had heard that Jesus was there, so they knew that he was coming. And how did they know? Now, again, for the past 6 months, Matthew, Mark's Gospels have been silent, but now we are back to interacting and harmonizing all 4 Gospels. Pretty important. We're getting into the Passion Week. All 4 Gospels start giving us illumination and reporting what's happening. So, let's talk about this a little bit. And so we're continuing on here. Talk about Jesus' route to Jerusalem. So he's in Ephraim because he can no longer hang out, be public in walk publicly because they're out to kill him. And he goes. Now the Passover is near, and and let's see, what I want to go. We talked about this. Okay. Then Luke 17. This is where you go to Luke. Luke 17. So he's in Ephraim. We get to Luke 17 and verse 11. And look what it says here. While he was on his way, now this is, we're getting right up to the triumphal entry. While he was on the way to Jerusalem, he was passing between Samaria and Galilee. Now remember where Ephraim was? I mean, Ephraim is right here. Jerusalem is just right here. Why, if he's going to go to Jerusalem, would he go all the way up to Galilee and then come back around? Seems like a pretty out of the way to go. Well, remember that there are 2 routes between Judea and Galilee. The ridge route, here that goes through, or the ridge route that goes through Samaria, and the Jews aren't going to generally go that way, particularly for the caravans. It's not really a safe thing for them to do this time of year. But it was shorter and it was faster. It goes through the heart of Samaria. The ridge route goes close to Samaria, but it's on the outside of it, along the Jordan Valley, right? So they're going down the rift. And this is the way that the caravans would go. It takes about 60 miles between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. 60 miles. Now, this is another place where we see Jesus being wise as a serpent, but as innocent as a dove. So now consider the dilemma before him. He needs to go to Jerusalem. He needs to be publicly presented to Israel as the Messiah Prince. And he has to do it without getting killed before Passover. So he goes up to Galilee to join the bands of pilgrims, the caravans, to go down the rift. So now he's going to be surrounded with people who aren't going to let the Jewish leaders get to him. And his travels through Samaria were safe. So he goes through Samaria, he joins up with the caravans in the Harod Valley, and now he's going down the rift with this group of people that are, you're just not going to get Jesus and seize him from here. And during this whole time, Jesus is teaching them and explaining things to him and performing miracles and healing. So all of these people, again, they're saturated. They know who Jesus is. Jesus demonstrated who he is during this, 3 to 5 days that they're on this path together. Now, we get confirmation that Jesus did indeed go along the rift route and thus join the caravans in both Matthew and Mark. So looking at Matthew, go to 19. So when Jesus had finished these words, he departed from Galilee and came into the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. So he's going to Perea. How do you go from Galilee to Perea? You take the ridge route. You go down the Harod Valley. You go across, you take the Harod Valley, and then you go down the ridge route and you end up in Perea. Okay, so that's what Jesus did. Now let's look at Mark 10:1. Getting up from there to the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan, Perea. Crowds gathered around him again, and according to his custom, he once more began to teach them. So we know what he was doing. So in these verses, he's said to both be healing and teaching the crowds that gathered around him. And again, Jesus is going to be safe as long as he's traveling with this group of people. Now, in Perea, Jesus is going to be, he's teaching, his teaching here, I'll just mention it. He's going to be teaching about, the 10 lepers, the kingdom of the second coming, fairly unfortunate widow, and the parable of the Pharisees and the publicans. And then he's going to be, we got the confirmation. So now we're back to here. So he's in Perea. He's going to teach on divorce. Jesus is going to bless the little children. He's going to address the rich young ruler. He's going to teach on the rewards for stewardship. And then the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. And we're going to get Jesus here talking about or foretelling his death, burial, and resurrection for the third time. So let's look at that. So in Matthew 20, he's going to be very clear with his disciples. And we're going to go to verse 17. So, as Jesus was about to go to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside by themselves, and on the way, so during this trip, he said to them, "Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes," they're out to kill him, "and they will condemn him to death, and will hand him over to the Gentiles to mock and scourge and crucify him, and on the third day he will be raised up." Matthew and Mark tell us the same thing. Mark and Luke tell us the same thing. Jesus tells the disciples that this is what's going to happen when we get to Jerusalem. Now, Then James and John are going to talk about their position in the kingdom and sitting on the right and the left. And yeah, you're going to die. Okay. But yeah, when the kingdom comes, I want tell me about your right and left. And Jesus like, that's up to the Father to determine that. So they end up in Jericho. So remember, back to our map, you go down the rift, you're in this Perea area, and then you're going to cross over to Jericho. And you cross over to Jericho, and we stop right in Jericho because that's going to be a really good place for us to pick up next time to set up for the triumphal entry. So we are now basically Thursday before, we're a week before the Last Supper. That's where we're at this point in time. So, all right, let me stop the stream and I'll close us in prayer.